Hi, this is Jennifer. Can you hear me?
I can hear Jennifer.
Great. Hopefully everyone else can. I'd like to do a board member roll call just to make sure we have a list of who's on so far and who we may need to reach out to if they're having trouble. So, Paul Smedberg, are you on yet? Okay. Stephanie, I think I heard you, yes?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, I heard Mike. Is Devin on? How about David Horner?
I'm here.
Great. Matt Letourneau, are you on? Okay. Greg Slater, I think I saw him. I know he's on. Yes?
Yep, I'm on. Thanks, Jennifer.
Sure. And Jeff Meridian?
I'm on. Yeah, I'm on. Thanks.
Great. And Steve McMillan?
I am here.
Great. So it looks like we're waiting on Paul, who said he would be joining shortly. Matt Letourneau, and then Devin. Okay.
Jennifer, this is
my
Paul.
log is having called in.
Sorry, Mike. What'd you say?
He's shown on my screen as having called in.
Oh, okay. Is he on mute, Alex?
Let me see here. You said we're looking for Matt?
We're looking for Matt and Paul Smedberg.
Paul's on. Paul's muted.
He is muted. Okay, can you unmute Paul? Thanks.
I'm muted right now. Yep.
Great. All right. How about Matt Letourneau?
I do not see Matt, but if Matt is on the attendee list and one of those call-in users, everybody on that list is unmuted at this point.
Let me just text him then.
Okay.
Jennifer, can you hear me?
Again, to
Yes, I can hear you now, Paul. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
perfect.
Hey, David, just so you're aware, the first roll call I do for finance will call Devin's name, but we will announce you when you sort of do the switch out. So when the budget item is over, we will note that you are now participating in the bond item. So just so you're aware, you won't be on the roll call, but we will announce you for the bond item when it comes on, okay?
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. And same will go for the board meeting.
Great. Thank you.
While we're waiting on everyone, go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
I have that in my script. I'm assuming that's me you were referring to.
You will note him. Yes, you will note him. Yep.
Okay.
Before we go live, does anybody have any questions, concerns, issues they want to raise at this point? We have about 3 or 4 minutes.
We are live, actually. I've been advised that YouTube is already going. So, is that in?
Sure. I'm also going to ensure that staff is on the call and not having any issues. I know Paul Wiedefeld is on, Patty Lee.
Patty's on, but she's muted.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me?
Teresa Impastato.
Good morning.
Great, thank you. Dennis Inasike.
Here.
Tom Webster.
Good morning, I'm here.
Great. I also believe Barbara Richardson's on.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jennifer, can you hear me? It's Patty.
Oh, yes, I can hear you now, Patty. Thank you.
Great.
Lynn Bowersox.
Yes, Jennifer, I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone to be announced?
You have me now, Jennifer, as well. This is Paul Wiedefeld.
Yes, I knew you were on. Yes, thank you. Yep. Okay, so we'll just wait for the remaining board members to join. Thank you.
Jennifer, I'm on. Joe Leader.
Oh, great. Thank you, Joe.
Good.
Okay, I believe Matt Letourneau has joined. Matt? He's muted. Let's unmute Matt, please. Thank you.
Matt, you should be able to talk now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep. I can hear you great. Thank you.
Okay.
So we're just waiting on one more.
Just to be clear, the mute function, if I want to mute, do I need to do it on the computer or does my normal phone mute work?
Phone works, I think, right,
Yeah,
Alex?
your phone works too. So correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you can mute from your cell phone or desk phone, or you can mute from the computer itself, whatever you find easier.
This is Steve. We just need Stephanie now and then ready to begin.
No, we're waiting on Devin. Stephanie is on. Yes, we're waiting on Devin. Yep. I've reached out to him.
Devin is there.
No, I'm out here. Yeah, I'm on.
You here? Okay, great. Awesome. So we are ready to go. Steve?
All right. The hour being 9 a.m., this is Steve Mcmillan, Chair of the Finance and Capital Committee. Good morning and welcome to the committee's April 2nd meeting. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we're conducting this meeting remotely and broadcasting it via YouTube. In order to help this meeting run as smoothly as possible under the new format, I'd like to lay out some procedures for everyone to follow. First, I'm going to ask Ms. Ellison, the Board Corporate Secretary, to call the roll to identify board members and Metro staff present on this call. When it comes time for a vote on our two agenda items, I'll ask Ms. Ellison to conduct a roll call vote as well. As a reminder, all board members, not just Finance Committee members, are eligible to vote on the FY 2021 budget item. I'd also request that members hold any questions or comments until the end of each presentation. Since I can't see which members want to ask questions, I'll just go round robin until there are no further questions or comments left. Also, if possible, please mute your phones while you're not speaking to help cut down on background noise. Finally, I'd like to note for the record that Mr. Horner has recused himself from the budget item and Mr. Rouse will participate in his place. With that, I will ask Ms. Ellison to identify board and staff members on today's call.
So the roll call, I'll start now. Director Mcmillan?
Here.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Present.
Director Slater?
Present.
Director Smedberg?
Present.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Present.
Director Gideby?
Present.
Director Goldman?
Present.
And Director Letourneau?
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Ellison, were you going to identify staff at this time or wait?
Yes, I'm heading to that next. Paul Wiedefeld?
Yes, I'm here.
Patty Lee? And let me clarify. I'll do titles as well for the public's benefit. General Manager Paul Wiedefeld.
Present.
General Counsel Patty Lee.
Here.
Chief Safety Officer Teresa Impastato.
Present.
Chief Financial Officer Dennis Anasike.
Here.
Chief of Capital Planning Tom Webster.
Here.
Chief of External Relations Barbara Richardson.
Here.
Vice President of Customer Service, Communications and Marketing Lynn Bowersox.
Yes, here.
Chief Operating Officer Joe Leader.
Present.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Mcmillan.
Thank you, Ms. Elson. I trust everyone's had a chance to review today's agenda. If there are no objections to the agenda, we'll consider it approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the agenda is approved. We also have the minutes from our previous meeting before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. So we have two significant items on today's agenda. The first is approval of Metro's FY 2021 operating budget and FY 2021 through 26 capital improvement program. I'd like to first thank all the writers and organizations who provided comments on the proposed budget. Over 17,000 of you either wrote letters or completed surveys or attended public hearings. Your feedback helped shape the proposal that is before the committee today. I'd also like to thank my board colleagues and Metro and jurisdictional staff who have worked to refine this proposal under challenging circumstances. Finally, this budget recognizes that we're in very uncertain times right now, but that we look forward to supporting our customers when they are able to return. The board will review the proposed budget prior to its July 1st, 2020 effective date and may need to make adjustments as circumstances require. The next item is approval of dedicated revenue bonds to support the capital improvement program. As discussed at last month's meeting, the board will be asked to authorize the negotiated sale of up to $545 million in dedicated revenue bonds in accordance with Wmata's debt management policy. With that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Wiedefeld and his team to begin the discussion of our first item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Paul Wiedefeld. First, I'm going to thank the board for continuing to work important budget process during obviously these very trying times. It is important for us to continue the process so that we can line up to get federal funding. It's also important, I believe, to show the community that we are thinking about the future, that we are thinking about how we grow ridership on the system, and how we will continue to manage their funds efficiently and effectively. So with that, I will turn it over to Dennis Anasiki and Tom Webster to go through the program. But I also want to thank the staff for all their tireless work over the last months on this, but particularly over the last month to do this budgeting process at the same time dealing with many, many other issues to keep the system up and running. So thank you. So with that, Dennis, please.
Thank you, Paul. Again, this is Dennis Anasiki. As the General Manager mentioned, I will be presenting this particular item with Tom Webster as well as Lynn Bowsacks. So starting on page 2 of the presentation, as the committee is aware, the GM presented a budget last November, which staff took out based on board direction to public hearing. Today, we will be discussing the elements of the budget for board approval, which includes a discussion of the equity analysis report, and then seek board acceptance of both the public participation report and ultimately approval of the FY 2021 budget and the FY 2021 to 2026 capital improvement program. Next slide, please. Overall, Metro's proposed operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2021 is about $4 billion, which compares to the $3.7 billion for FY 2020. Both components of the budget, which means the capital as well as the operating elements, are focused on improving safety, reliability, and fiscal accountability of the Metro system. Next slide, please. As required by regional and federal law, Wmata held public hearing in the district, the Commonwealth, and the state of Maryland to solicit comments on the proposed budget. I will turn it over to Ms. Bowsacks to review details as well as the results from the public outreach. Ben?
Thank you, Dennis. Mr. Chairman, as you noted, Metro received over 17,000 responses to our proposed budget. The lion's share of those came through online surveys submitted by folks representing all of the jurisdictions and even some outside of the transit zone. We also welcomed a couple of hundred people to our public hearings, most heavily attended being at the headquarters office in the JGB, where more than 100 people came and spoke about the proposed budget changes and service changes. Actually, service enhancements were quite popular with the public who commented. In fact, restoring late night rail service got the largest percentage of supporting comments. Better weekend Metro rail service, very close second, and then better weekend Metro bus also more than half of the respondents supported. Notably, the item that received the greatest opposition or the least support were certain bus service changes that were proposed in the original draft. With respect to fare changes, anything that made travel more affordable was generally well supported by the public, including improvements to the bus rail transfer discount, improvements to weekend fares that made travel more affordable on weekends, and of course the reduced bus pass fare proposal. I would also note that of the 12,000 people in the survey who responded to the fare items that were proposed, more than a third actually supported an increase on the base rail fare, which is an unusually high number for a proposed fare increase. Last, I would just note that with respect to the capital program that was proposed, most of the comments came in three categories. One, specific projects where the public supported investments. Worthy of note was the support for the White Flint North entrance as an example of a station improvement that received a lot of supportive comments. Sustainability, anything that makes Metro more carbon neutral, including rolling stock and infrastructure changes towards electric or alternative zero emission buses, was very popular. And then thirdly, level of accountability for the capital program, understandably with the new level of dedicated capital funding to Metro, an interest in seeing the return on investment. And we look forward to providing more detail on our Wmata.com website in new capital pages that are being produced and will be project specific in the coming year. Thank you, Dennis, and Tom, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is Tom Webster. Next slide, please. So through our capital program, Metro is improving the safety, service reliability, and financial stability. And over the next 6 years, Metro will replace several of our oldest and obsolete facilities and focus on investment in stations and systems to improve safety and reliability. The investment focus and priority is on projects and programs that will improve safety and reliability, further reduce our state of good repair backlog, and proactively keep up with ongoing life cycle preservation, rehabilitation, replacement, and improvements. The 6-year capital program totaled $9.7 billion, as you see on this slide, and the proposed capital budget totals $1.8 billion. For planning purposes, we're also projecting both state of good repair and modernization programs and projects for the period beyond the 6-year period to the next 10 years and beyond. Next slide, please. This morning, I'll just briefly recap what major projects and programs are included in the capital budget. So Metro will improve customer experience by investing in station and passenger facilities, making it easier for customers to access and use Metro. $2.2 billion is programmed over the next 6 years. For Metro Rail, the investments include platform rehabilitation program, station modernization, elevators and escalators, and the systems and stations, including fire systems, lighting, cooling, public address, public information, and fare collection. For Metrobus, the key investments include bus stop accessibility improvements, bus shelters, and customer information. Next slide, please. Metro needs safe and reliable rail cars, buses, and paratransit vehicles to move riders safely and more efficiently throughout the region. Metro plans to invest $2.4 billion in vehicles over the next 6 years. Capital program will replace the oldest rail cars with new modern rail cars while maintaining and rehabilitating existing rail cars to ensure safe and on-time performance. Metro will also invest in new buses and rehabilitate existing buses to ensure reliability. And we will be pursuing a demonstration project and pilots in electric bus systems to determine feasibility of a larger scale deployment. We'll also continue to invest in new Metro access vehicles. Next slide, please. The remainder of the capital program are the facilities and infrastructure and systems that are not immediately obvious to customers and the public, but they're the infrastructure and support facilities that make Metro go. So over the next 6 years, Metro plans to invest about $5 billion in infrastructure systems and support facilities, including our track and structures, our traction power systems, our train control systems, replacing the most old and obsolete bus garages, including Northern and Bladensburg, and then, of course, our office consolidation program and continued investment in modernization of information technology systems. Next slide, please. So, in conclusion here, the capital financial plan on the left side of this slide includes $1.8 billion for capital investments in FY21 and $9.7 billion through 2026. Also listed are the amounts anticipated to offset revenue loss caused by capital projects and an estimated amount of future debt service payments to be supported by dedicated funding. This CIP investment plan by category remains unchanged from the plan that the GM proposed back in November, December. And finally, on the table on the right shows the anticipated funding sources for the capital program for FY21 and the 6-year period. The FY21 jurisdictional contributions remain unchanged in total, but the allocation among jurisdictions has been updated to reflect the updated operating budget allocation that's applied to the capital program. And the detailed allocations are included in, I believe it's attachment G in the resolution packet. In FY21, we anticipate about $321 million of federal formula and other grants for the capital program and $149 million of CREA funding. And Metro's grants team has been working with FTA in anticipation of board adoption of the budget today and is prepared to submit the formula and FTA or FTA formula and CREA grant applications to FTA on time about a month from today. That concludes this part of the presentation. I will turn it back over to Dennis.
Thank you, Tom. Next slide, please. Thank you. The budget proposals before the committee today reflects the comments that Lynn described earlier in terms of feedback from stakeholders to the budget. But overall, the proposed operating budget will continue to support Wmata's safety, reliability, and fiscal management initiatives while keeping Wmata within the 3% annual subsidy growth cap. Next slide, please. In terms of specific service changes, this slide lists some of the elements contained in the proposed budget. On Metro Rail, riders will see better service on weekends and during late nights. On Metro Bus, customers will see improved weekend service along with enhanced Metro Extra service on busy corridors. Next slide, please. On the fare side, overall, riders can more easily predict their fares and in some cases pay lower fares using passes. Peak fares on Metro Rail will increase for the first time in 3 years. But riders on Metro Rail will also pay a flat fare on weekends. On Metro Bus, the 7-day bus pass price will decrease from $15 to $12. Finally, the budget also increases the bus to rail transfer discount from 50 cents to $1. Next slide, please. So in terms of numbers, the slide shows base operating budget complies with the dedicated funding legislation which caps annual operating subsidy at 3% with certain exclusions. Looking at the second row from the top, expenses are projected to grow by 2% over the current fiscal year, with revenues on the third row only growing by 0.5% year over year. As a result, base operating subsidy, which is shown in the bottom row, will increase by $33.8 million. Next slide, please. In addition to the cap subsidy that I just described, the slide shows legislatively excluded contributions that are tied to mandates and capital projects in the amount of $87.1 million for fiscal year 2021. Next slide, please. So when you combine the two previous slides, the total operating subsidy for fiscal year 2021 is $1,264.3 million, which is shown in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. Next slide, please. So based on the document that was distributed by John last night, there were a few changes made to the documents that the board saw earlier. This next slide is one of those. The aggregate management actions for next year has gone up by $1 million to a total of $30 million next year. And that was done to accommodate the additional routes, bus routes that were restored in Maryland as well as in Virginia. And we can go into detail if the board chooses to do that. But overall, this slide shows that management actions for next year will be $30 million, along with what management has done in previous years. Next slide, please. The slide also changed to reflect conversations regarding Loudoun County, which shows on the third to the bottom row. For the year, Loudoun County's contribution is shown as $5.5 million compared to the previous set of numbers. Next slide, please. Tom, do you want to take this, please? Mr. Webster?
Yes. So following the public hearing process and the board's deliberations on the updated service and fare proposals, staff completed the Title VI equity analysis as part of this process. Fare changes and most of the service changes do not result in a disparate impact for minority populations or a disproportionate burden for low-income populations. As anticipated, the early morning Metro Rail headway changes do not violate Title VI, but do show a disparate impact. That disparate impact is mitigated by the fact that it allows Metro to improve service during other time periods and to provide a capacity to ramp up service early morning that while customers will only see an increase of 2 minutes in wait time on average from 4 to 6 minutes during this time period. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. So as we do every year, we've identified on this slide potential risks to the budget. And as Chairman Macmillan said earlier, the board may take another look at the budget. So these are all moving targets at this point. Which takes me to the last slide, please. With that, Mr. Chairman, staff recommends acceptance of the staff report and the equity analysis, as well as approval of the FY 2021 budget and FY 2021 to 2026 capital improvement program.
Thank you, Dennis. Chairman Mcmillan here. So we'll now move to board questions. I know we do have a couple amendments, but let's hold on those for now and just confine ourselves to questions on the presentation. I have no questions. Mr. Meridian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions.
Mr. Slater?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick questions. One, Silverline noted as a risk. How in-depth are the steps essentially between when the construction ends and we accept that for operation?
This is Paul. I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm just a question associated with the Silverline and kind of construction side. So when that's finished construction, how long is that process between construction and when we accept that for operations?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, approximately 3 months, but to be frank, it depends. You know, when we start to test it, if we run into any issues, at the end of the day, they will be not accepted to the regional plan, the regional transportation plan, until the board accepts it. So we will do our due diligence and then take it to the board for acceptance. But if everything goes fairly smoothly, I would expect roughly between 60 and 90 days.
Okay, thank you. And then just one kind of quick question associated with the other risk on the COVID-19 issue. So, you know, the world that we're in right now is a little bit upside down, and I would also say that the world that we're going to see afterwards has a lot of changing dynamics, whether between us, our local partners, people we serve, everything is going to be a little bit different. You know, how do you feel like the board or the budget will handle those kind of changing dynamics?
As I think as called for, we will revisit this before the fiscal year starts in July 1 with the board, the budget. And then obviously we do quarterly updates on the budget, and we'll be monitoring very closely both pluses and minuses, and we'll bring those to the board with any issues that we may have.
Great, thank you. I do want to take a moment and thank your entire staff for this budget. Was a lot of work, and I know this current situation has really turned everything upside down. So I recognize that there's a lot of work that goes into this, and I just want to thank you for everything.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Smedberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions. I do appreciate the Secretary's last question about you know, the budget impact that we're going to experience because of all the recent circumstances, and understand that this will be, you know, particularly challenging time for our partners as well. So we'll have to really work together on this. And I too want to thank the staff and appreciate all their work in the last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions from my side, but I would like to echo that thanks to the staff for all their hard work, especially with everything that's been going on this past couple of weeks.
Great. Ms. Gitterby?
I join in the choir just appreciating the staff to date, in addition to addressing some of the challenges that DC had elevated up as we were going through the negotiation process. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. There are two issues that I would just like to comment on that are in the budget documents, but are not very well explained. And these are sort of future matters that I think your committee should consider. The first has to do with the use of federal capital funds for preventive maintenance purposes. Traditionally and historically, the board has used a level of $60 million for federal funds that could be used for operating purposes. In the details of this budget, we're actually increasing that this year to $96 million, largely in connection with the Silver Line Phase 2 ramp up. And there's really been no more discussion of this either in your committee or more generally of this policy change. And I do think that that's a matter when we have more time and we're in a more normal circumstances after the coronavirus emergency ends, hopefully by the fall when we can revisit the issue, because using the federal capital funds in the operating budget has the effect of reducing the amount of money available for capital, which would either require some alteration in the capital program or greater debt for the authority. So I think that's a broad policy issue that we should revisit in the fall, and I would urge your committee to do so. The second issue that turns up in the budget document is that in connection with the ramp up of the Silver Line Phase 2, we anticipate a 3-month period of operation in the April, May, June 2021 period. And we've assumed revenue of $5 million for that based on a forecast of roughly $20 million in annual revenue, which has been developed by some of the jurisdictions in Virginia. Again, this is an area that's really not well described in the budget documents, and I think it's a matter that your committee and the board generally should review again, because we don't really have a ridership forecast which goes with this $20 million of anticipated revenue on an annual basis. And I think it's important that we get a better understanding of what type of ridership is projected on the Silver Line Phase 2. Right now, since we're only dealing with $5 million of revenue in a operating budget of over $2 billion, it's not a significant issue. But I think as we look forward early next year to a budget for the future year, assuming we ever have a normal budget year again, free of the coronavirus and the kind of social distancing measures that are required and that we're experiencing now, we will need to look at what a full year's revenue and cost for the Silver Line Phase 2 looks like. And I think that at that point, it'll be appropriate for your committee and others at the board to take a good hard look at Silver Line projections, both in terms of costs and revenue, and see where we're going with Silver Line Phase 2 as a broad policy issue. So those are two observations that I wanted to bring to the attention of my colleagues on the board and your committee especially. And so I thank you for the time to do that this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Let me quickly react to that regarding Silver Line. We know one thing right now, which is that these are simply projections. There's a lot of uncertainty about ridership and timing. We have made some assumptions based on the best information we have right now for the purposes of this budget, but the good news is when service actually begins, we'll have people actually tapping in when they ride Silver Line Phase 2, and we'll know exactly what we're dealing with on a daily basis. And certainly the staff, the board, and this committee will keep an eye on that and respond appropriately if need be. On preventive maintenance, you touched on an issue that is of special interest to me as well. I'd note that the resolution that we'll be voting on here shortly does contain the same $60 million cap that has appeared in prior budgets. I share your deep concern that in order to keep this system safe and reliable, we need to protect the capital program from being undermined. But the $36 million question figure that you mentioned, I'd ask Mr. Wiedefeld or others on the staff to put that figure in perspective, that we do still have that $60 million cap, but there is, anyway, please explain the circumstances around the 36 briefly.
Okay. This is Dennis. Thank you, Steve. The board has in recent years limited the level of preventive maintenance flex to operating to $16 million. And for purposes of FY operating budget, that $60 million remains the baseline. But in addition to that, as the silver line ramp up conversation started late last year and through early this year, the board was informed on several occasions about the commitment that Wmata could make towards the first year of silver line, which included the $36.4 million that Mr. Goldman referenced, and the source of that being the preventive maintenance program. So the expectation is that this is a one-time allocation, which means in 2022, Wmata will revert back to the $60 million when the jurisdictions will pick up the entire cost of silver line. But this was done to reduce the lift for the first year with respect to the startup for silver line.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. I think we'll leave it at that for the moment. And Mr. Letourneau, any comments or questions?
Yeah, well, just a couple things. I am appreciative of the fact that we do have the Silver Line startup money as well as a quarter of the year's subsidy included in the budget. I think it's important that we do finish this project, and I think Metro ramping up for it is an indication that we are intending to do that. I will say we do have currently weekday ridership estimates of about 1,700 daily riders at an average daily fare of about $385. That's what Wmata has projected so far. So it's not as if there aren't numbers. Obviously, those will be refined and need to be refined as we get further into this, and hopefully we actually get riders. I did want to mention, echoing some of the other comments, this is a really unprecedented time. It's sort of surreal even doing a budget in these sorts of times because there is pretty much unprecedented uncertainty out there on a lot of fronts. And being somebody from one of the jurisdictions, I'm particularly sensitive to where they're at this moment in time. And I certainly hope that the board and the general manager will do our best to work with those jurisdictions on their subsidy issues. We are hearing now that because of significant revenue shortfalls that are projected in various jurisdictions, they're going to have difficulty paying the subsidies that we're asking of them. And I think that's to be expected. I'm sure it's the same is going to be true for the states involved in this. And there's a lot of unknowns, such as how much federal help is actually coming both to this system and to all the others that are incurring costs. But this is a very fluid situation. As was briefly alluded to, there is a change to the Virginia subsidy table here. It reflects the accurate depiction of who's supposed to be paying what and when Loudoun is coming into the system. But I do want to acknowledge that this change at the last minute is causing a lot of heartburn for some of the jurisdictions in Virginia that now are scrambling with different numbers. And that's very unfortunate. We can have a different discussion at a different point about how we get to that point with the incorrect table, but we did. So that's just an extra pressure point that jurisdictions are dealing with. Finally, as it relates to fare policy, this budget does make some changes to fare policy intended to promote ridership, intended to make it easier to ride on the weekends. And those are all good goals and they're appropriate things. And there are things that I'm supportive of, but I also understand that we're in a completely new world. And I think even when we're through the peak of this, we're going to be dealing with a very different ridership scenario, probably very different revenue projections. And so I do think the board, as has been stated, will have to recalibrate and figure out what are the things that we're going to have to do in that situation to get riders back and also to make budgets. So those are really my comments. I'd like to thank everyone who worked on this. It's difficult doing these meetings all by phone and not being able to have some of that one-on-one interaction with staff and with colleagues on the board. But we did get through it. Hopefully next year we can have a more normal process. I do think having work sessions in the middle of a process was very, very helpful. because it does help flesh out issues like the one we just recently were dealing with on the subsidy table. So that will be something that I will push for in next year's process, but hopefully we'll all be together and in person in doing that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Latino. With that, I would like to move approval of the FY 2021 budget resolution before us today. Is there a second?
Second.
Please identify.
Jeff Meridian.
Thank you. Motion has been seconded. I understand we have two amendments from members for the committee's consideration today. First, Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to amend the resolution approval of fiscal year 2021 capital budget and fare and service changes and public participation report as follows. The 11th resolve clause shall be deleted in its entirety and replaced by the following. Resolved that the board rescinds the 9th and 10th resolve clauses of resolution 2016-01, directs that the operating budget shall be prepared using an assumption of the actuarial forecasted claims payments in an amount that the GM/CEO deems appropriate, and authorizes the GM/CEO or his designee to fund the claims liability fund in an amount deemed appropriate for fiscal year 2021 and each fiscal year thereafter, provided, however, that the GM/CEO shall obtain concurrence from the board each fiscal year prior to implementing the funding of the claim liability fund, and be it further, and then this is the second proposed change, the 12th resolve clause shall be deleted in its entirety and replaced by the following. Resolved that the board authorizes the GM/CEO to fund the OPEB trust in fiscal year 2021 and subsequent fiscal years in an amount deemed appropriate, and to establish an obsolescence reserve to be funded in an amount each fiscal year deemed appropriate for the purpose of recording the cost associated with the disposal of unusable and unsaleable items, provided, however, that the GM/CEO shall obtain concurrence from the board each fiscal year prior to implementing the funding of the OPEB trust and the funding of the obsolescence reserve, and be it further. And then the third and final, the 17th resolved clause shall be deleted in its entirety and replaced by the following. Resolved that the board authorizes the GM/CEO to reprogram within the capital budget any unused FY 2020 funds related to capital funding provided to support operating revenue losses caused by service disruptions associated with major capital projects, provided, however, that the GM/CEO shall obtain concurrence from the board prior to any such reprogramming of capital funds back into the FY 2020 capital budget set aside to offset operating impacts of major capital projects, and be it further. Those are the three proposed amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. We have an amendment on the floor. Is there a second?
Second. This is Jeff Meridian.
Thank you. As I understand the amendments, which have been circulated previously to the board, this simply adds an additional layer of board approval for some of the authorities provided to the GM under the base text of the resolution. Is there any further discussion of the amendments? If not, the secretary will now call the roll for the vote.
Director Mcmillan?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director Smedberg?
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye.
Director Gideby?
Aye.
Director Goldman?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment passes. Thank you, Ms. Ellison. So we have another amendment to consider. I believe, Mr. Slater, you will be offering that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I move to amend the resolution approval of fiscal year 2021 capital budget and fare and service changes in public participation report as follows. Delete the fourth whereas clause and add a new first resolved clause that reads as follows. Resolved, due to the scope of the government-imposed emergency measures, such as office and business closures and travel restrictions and the resulting impact on Metro's finances and ridership levels, the board will review the approved fiscal year FY 2021 budget prior to its July 1st, 2020 effective date, at which time the board may reconsider the timing for the implementation of certain initiatives, and be it further, all succeeding resolved clauses shall be renumbered accordingly.
Thank you. We have an amendment on the floor. Is there a second?
I will second that. It's Mike Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. So again, this amendment has been circulated previously to board members. It is clarifying what has been discussed before, the intent of the board to revisit the decisions in this budget prior to July 1st so that we can assess the new information and circumstances that we've become aware of at that point in time. So is there any further discussion? If not, the secretary will now call the roll.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mcmillan.
Go right ahead.
I'm sorry. This is Mike Goldman. I just wanted to speak in support of the secretary's amendment and just bring to the board's attention, a letter that I had received from the Montgomery County Director of Transportation and similar comments from the Prince George's County government as to why such a relook before July 1 is important to them and other local government partners that we have. And I just want to quote from this letter from Director Conklin, which has been made available to other board members, and I assume is in the public file at this point. And he goes on to say, there is significant uncertainty about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on local government budgets. In this context, we are concerned that being able to maintain critical transportation services provided by Montgomery County Transit in the coming year, if we follow Wmata's fare policy, as is our normal practice, to provide equity and clarity to our transit customers, implementation of this discount, referring to the transit discount, will greatly and substantially impact our local transit budget. More pressure on this already strained budget may result in service cuts. I think I feel very strongly that that has to be taken into account, since Ride-On is the second largest bus operator following Metrobus in the metropolitan area. And just like Metrobus, even before Metrobus began this practice in light of the coronavirus, Ride-On is not collecting any fare revenue because in order to enforce social distancing, it is requiring riders to entry and exit through the rear doors. So I guess my prayer to you is that we simply can't fail to take account the impact that our actions will have on our regional partners. And so we must be prepared to take a hard look at our budget initiatives in light of COVID-19 in June. And for those reasons, I strongly support the Secretary's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. I would just note that at the time we do our review, it's my intent that this committee take into account the perspectives of all our stakeholders, including the regional partners, and that all initiatives, all base level of service, et cetera, should be part of that review. As chairman, I don't intend to exclude any particular idea from consideration or to single any out. The budget as a whole is what we will be taking another look at as we approach the July 1st date. Any other discussion from any other committee member or board members? Excuse me. If not, then the secretary will now call the roll for the vote.
Director Mcmillan?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director Smedberg?
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye.
Director Gideby?
Aye.
Director Goldman?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment passes.
Thank you. Assuming no further amendments, we'll now proceed with the original motion on the floor as amended. It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, the secretary will now call the roll for the vote.
Director Mcmillan?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director Smedberg?
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye.
Director Gideby?
Aye.
Director Goldman?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thank you. That concludes the committee's consideration of the budget and CIP. So we will now move to our next action item, the dedicated revenue bond resolution and issuance. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next slide, please. As I mentioned during the pre-brief, Mr. Chairman, I want to preface today's conversation by stating that what we're attempting to do here is to seek board approval, or committee as well as board approval of this document at a later date, and wait to see what happens, or hopefully that the market will stabilize, at which time we will proceed in support of the capital programs. But if the market does not stabilize, then we will simply wait before we take any further actions. So with that, the next slide shows that staff, we are today looking for approval of the dedicated bond resolution, which will be the first time that the dedicated revenues will be used directly by Wmata to access the capital markets. And specifically, we are asking the committee for authorization to issue the Series 2 2020A bonds for $545 million, again, to support the capital program. As we discussed in previous committee sessions, this authorization is made possible by the region's recent act in terms of establishing dedicated revenues for Wmata. This credit and the liens that they come through it, again, will leverage dedicated revenues. Wmata will establish a trust, has already established a trust where all of these funds will go to. And as with other bond issuances, the bondholders will also get a trust where these monies will go to directly for the repayment of these bonds. And as Wmata seeks to go to the market, we are going to be leveraging debt in ways that minimize the impact while maximizing the resources available for the capital program. Next slide, please. Overall, over the next 6 years, the expectation is that debt will provide about $1.6 billion to support the capital projects, consistent with what the board approved earlier today as described by Mr. Webster. Next slide. Again, this slide simply suggests that rates are relatively low comparatively speaking, but it's also much more volatile today. That frankly, given what's going on with respect to revenue-based bonds, the market is slightly dislocated at this point, and there's no expectation that we will be going to the markets next month as we originally contemplated, unless the market further stabilizes. On slide 6, which you're looking at now, This will be a 25-year maturity. I mentioned earlier that the amount to be $545 million. And we expect, based on recent trends, that the overall cost will be under 3%. Again, these things could change by the time we go to the market itself. Next slide, please. So as we discussed with the committee last month, in terms of sales strategy, given that this is a new credit, given that it involves multiple revenue streams, multiple jurisdictions, and the complexity and volatility in the market today, staff recommends a negotiated strategy for this particular transaction, which will comply with the Wmata's debt management policy. Next slide. This is the timeline that we had been working with, but again, this could change and will be frankly dependent on what happens in the market from here on. Next slide. With that, staff recommends approval of the 2020 dedicated revenue bond resolution on authorization to issue the $545 million of debt to support the capital program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dennis. We'll now move to board questions. And just to note, Mr. Horner is not recused from this item and will participate. I'll just begin briefly with a comment for the benefit of the rest of the board here. We are proceeding with committee action today to make sure staff has the guidance and authority they need to continue this process and seek the best price in the market for our financing needs. We will not be acting on this item in the full board today. So if we happen to know more at the time of our next meeting, I'm sure Dennis, you and your colleagues will update us on the on how your assessment of conditions in the market have changed at that time. And again, we want to make sure you're in position to take advantage of any opportunities so that we can get our capital program funded in the most efficient manner. So I'll leave it at that and move on to—
Mr. Chairman?
Yes?
I'm sorry, this is Stephanie. I just wanted to just offer one comment.
Okay, I was going to do round robin, but
No
let me start with committee members first, and we'll make sure we get you. Okay, starting with Mr. Meridian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions or comments at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too have no questions.
Ms. Gittaby. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to just echo my, just elevate my voice as it relates to just certainty for the region during this time, and just for our neighbors and thinking about the board resolutions that we are approving today, especially as it relates to many of the programs that really benefit fair riders and riders overall in the region. As we think about the reality of what's happening, we recognize that we have to adjust to what is going to be happening in the jurisdictions without question. I think that this board has worked very intentionally to ensure that we elevate those concerns, consider those concerns, and I just wanted to make sure that it was also clear that in being able to approve this budget at this time and come back to just ensure that we've considered all those impacts before July 1st, it's really an opportunity to offer certainty. And I just wanted to make sure that that was recorded as my comment and thought process during this time. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Mr. Horner?
I have no question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman? No questions. Mr. Letourneau.
So just to reiterate, it's our thought process at this point to not go into the market next month. Is there a time period by which we feel like we do have to sell debt irrespective of whatever the market issues are.
Mr. Latano, that's, I think my representation is slightly different. What we want to do is make sure that we have the appropriate approvals in hand and then observe market behavior to the extent that the market stabilizes. And we conclude that it's appropriate to go into the market at that time, yes, we will do so. But until the market stabilizes, it will not be in Metro's interest to approach the market to issue debt.
Right, and I appreciate that. I guess what I'm asking is there a point in time at which, for various funding reasons, we really have to sell debt, or is that point in time not in the immediate future, and therefore we can sort of wait this out as long as we need to?
Yes, there is a point. There's a point in time. The original projection was that we will approach the market in May based on the capital needs in July and August. Obviously, if the region suspends capital construction, then there will be no need. So this is an evolving environment that we're all monitoring to see what is going on with respect to construction, what is going on with respect to the market, and what's going on with respect to Metro's cash flow. All of those three things will play a role in terms of our determination to approach the market.
Okay.
All right. Does that complete your questions there, Mr. Letourneau?
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we've completed all board questions. So I'd like
to Mr. Chair. Chair.
Mr. Smedberg?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Mr. Anasecki, just one quick question. Given what you just said, the one slide there where you're thinking the best strategy to approach the market is through a competitive stance, does that change at all potentially down the road, or is that something that you're committed to regardless of how stable or unstable the markets are?
Mr. Chairman, our recommendation was to do a negotiated sale in light of everything that's going on. Assuming the market stabilizes, the other two factors are still present, meaning that this is still a multi-jurisdictional supported issuance.
Okay.
And it's still a new issuance to the market, which will require significant education.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no further questions, then I would like to move approval of the bond resolution before us today. Is there a second?
Second. This is Jeff Meridian.
Thank you. Any further discussion? And if not, the secretary will now call the roll for the vote. As a reminder, this vote is only for committee members.
Director Mcmillan?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director Smedberg?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thank you. And with no further business to come before the committee stands adjourned, and Mr. Goldman will begin the Safety and Operations Committee meeting in just a moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ellison or whoever is in the room, should we begin now, or do you want to wait for a minute or two before beginning the Safety and Operations Committee meeting?
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. Ellison. No, you're more than welcome to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning again. And this is Mike Goldman, the chair of the Safety and Operations Committee for today. This is our meeting of April 2nd, 2020, which is being conducted virtually, as you're aware, in response to the ongoing public health coronavirus emergency. As with the Finance Committee meeting that immediately preceded this one, I'll ask Ms. Ellison, the Board Corporate Secretary, to call the roll of board members and Metro staff who are on the call for this committee meeting, and I would ask individuals who are speaking to identify themselves if there might be any question as to who's speaking. I'll also ask that members hold any questions or comments on today's presentations until the end of each presentation, since I can't see which member wants to ask questions, like Chairman Mcmillan, I'll go round robin until there are no further questions or comments by board members. Also, if possible, please mute your phones when you're not speaking to help cut down the background noise. So with that, I'll ask Ms. Ellison to identify the board and staff members on the committee's call today.
Thank you. Director Goldman.
Present.
Director Horner.
Present.
Director Gideby.
Present.
Director Letourneau.
Present.
Director Slater.
Present.
Director Mcmillan. Alternate Director Meridian.
Present.
I'm sorry,
Director
Mcmillan
Smedberg?
is present. Mcmillan is present. I was muted. Sorry.
No problem. I was going to come back to you. Thanks. Director Smedberg.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum, and now I will call the roll for staff. General Manager Paul Wiedefeld.
Present.
General Counsel Patty Lee. Here. Chief Safety Officer Teresa Impastato.
Present.
Chief Financial Officer Dennis Anasike.
Present.
Chief of Capital Planning Tom Webster. Chief External Relations Officer Barbara Richardson.
Present.
Senior Vice President for Customer Service, Communications, and Marketing Lynn Bowerstocks. Chief Operating Officer Joe Leader.
Present.
Thank you. That concludes my roll call. Yes,
Thank you.
that concludes my roll call. Thank you.
Thank you. We have today's agenda before us. If there are no objections to the agenda, we'll consider it approved as presented. Are there any objections to that agenda? Hearing none, I'll declare the agenda approved. Takes us to minutes. We have minutes from our last meeting before us for approval. I trust that everyone has had an opportunity to review the minutes from our March 12 meeting. Seems like eons ago. There are any objections? We'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved. So let me now briefly just review our two agenda items before us today. First, our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa Impastato, will provide the committee and the public with an update on Metro's response to the COVID-19 emergency and where we stand at this stage of the crisis. And next, Ms. Impastato will provide the committee with an update on efforts to reduce customer and employee injuries on the Metro Rail system. This complements the similar presentation that she made at our last meeting on Metro Bus and Metro Access. And hopefully when we return to normal times, our riders can enjoy these initiatives that she will be describing. So Mrs. Impastato, I guess COVID-19 is the first item on your agenda today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Metro is currently still in phase 3 of our pandemic response plan. As of this morning, we have 9 confirmed cases at Metro. Most of those individuals are recovering at home, and we are checking in on them on a regular basis as they convalesce. Our ridership has lowered significantly, with an approximate 94% reduction in rail ridership year over year, and a 76% reduction in bus ridership year over year. We've altered service patterns and schedules to balance providing essential service with conservation of resources, including our cleaning capabilities, the use of our equipment, and our manpower. In the time since our last update, we've taken multiple actions to reduce the exposure risk to our employees, including the use of rear door boarding and deployment of 100% usage of bus shields, closing the first and last cars on our trains, and modifying many of our work practices enhance our practice social distancing. All of these actions have been taken in close collaboration with later leadership, without whom our efforts would not have been possible. We're continuously monitoring the evolution of the situation and are working around the clock to continue to provide essential services to the region while ensuring the health and welfare of our workforce. We will remain in phase 3 for the indefinite future. Dedicated subgroups of the pandemic task force are meeting daily, and the full task force meets twice per week to review our response. We are also actively drafting a recovery plan to ensure an orderly return to service once public health authorities has advised it is safe to do so. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Let me just ask you just one or two questions to get started. When we did the town hall on Sunday, my recollection is that you announced, or the general manager announced, that there had been, I think it was 6 Metro employees who had tested positive for the virus. I guess if you could just update us on that. Is that still the current number? And what is the condition of those employees? And we wish them, of course, good health and recovery, or if any are really suffering in the hospital at the current time. So if you could provide that kind of an update, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, sir. We currently have 9 confirmed cases at Metro. Most of those individuals are recovering at home. We're checking in on them as they convalesce. We did put a public-facing dashboard. It is available online that notes the number of confirmed cases we have, as well as some of the information regarding location and date of confirmation that is available to the general public.
And I guess the other question I would just ask before opening it up to others is under what circumstances, if any, might we be forced to consider a total shutdown of the system, either rail or bus, in response to the current emergency? Does it depend on what kind of guidance we'd be getting from the CDC and local authorities, or does it depend on the kind of absentee rates we're experiencing? I think the current riders who have to use the system, the essential employees under the current circumstances, would value some guidance on what our future plans may be.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Wiedefeld. Yes, it would be driven whether there was something done at a federal or local level that in effect restricted us from operating service. If there were significant staffing issues, that would be an issue, of course. Obviously, any health-related issues could drive that. I don't anticipate that happening. I think we are playing the critical role that we need to play in the community by providing the services we are providing for those people that need to get to medical institutions, for those people that work at medical institutions, as well as just some of the things for basic life essentials like food. So it's very important that we do that, and we're committed to it. I know the union, we've worked very closely with the union to do that, so that is our right now, that is the anticipation. We will continue to provide the essential service for those people that actually do need that type of travel, unless, in effect, other circumstances overtake us.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. I appreciate that guidance, and I'm sure the riders and the jurisdictions do as well. Other questions from board members? Mr. Horner?
No questions at the moment.
Ms. Gideby?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to elevate my appreciation for the staff and the leadership team. Since January, Metro has been on it and being able to ensure that we had a plan in place. And I think the response to the COVID has been one that has been swift and one that has been very thoughtful along the journey over the last few weeks and months. I also want to just thank the staff. When we start to talk about what an essential employee looks like, we talk about our doctors, but not necessarily the bus drivers who are putting their lives who are coming to work every day to ensure that everyone else can get to where they need to go to effectively and safely. And so I want to just thank the full team at Metro, the union workers, and everyone else who has just been ensuring that we have been able to meet the needs of the region during this time.
Thank you. We'll ask Mr. Letourneau, any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
Thank you. Just no questions, 2 comments. First, I would like to thank the entire team as well and tell everyone, please don't forget about our frontline workers who are so critical to this region being able to move around and critical to our recovery, and they're continuing to deliver every day. And the other thing, more specific, I'd like to just say, Ms. Impastato, I think you're doing a great job. So I know it's a challenging situation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Mcmillan? We'll skip Mr. Mcmillan. Mr. Marudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions and would echo my colleague, Ms. Gideby, in our appreciation for the leadership and all of the staff at Wmata for doing an excellent job during these trying times.
Thank you, Chair Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, but also want to not only point out our Chief Safety Officer, who's been in the position, who's still relatively new to the organization and has really stepped up and provided a leadership role, not only for Wmata, but for the region in general, and all the other people that are part of this effort at Wmata, heading, tackling this head on. So joining what Stephanie and Jeff and others have said along the way. Secretary Slater, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Impastato, I'll echo that on behalf of the committee itself, and doing an exemplary job. And it's good that besides dealing with the coronavirus emergency, you're actually able to deal with these more, shall we say, mundane occupations of the safety officer these days. And so with that in mind, we'll turn to this other business and the safety matters that you deal with on a regular 9 to 5, 24/7 basis. And so I would ask you now to go over with us the Metro Rail safety initiatives that are the subject of your presentation today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next slide, please. The purpose of my presentation is to provide an update on our recent hazard mitigation strategies to improve customer and employee safety. As you stated in the introductory phrasing, this is meant to complement the update given at our last session with regard to safety initiatives within bus and metro access. Next slide, please. With regard to our data-driven management of safety, the 4 main metrics which are used to gauge rail safety performance are encapsulated in the National Transit Database. They are our collision rate, derailment rate, customer injury rate, and the OSHA recordable employee injury rate. Of note on this slide, the benchmarking data uses the most recent NTD data set available, which is calendar year 2018. The EIR, the employee injury rate, does use calendar year 19 for Wmata data, but compares it to the most recent data from calendar year 2018 for our sister agencies. In order to provide some context relative to the symbols of the sister agencies against whom we've benchmarked, in the lower left quartile collision rate, the far left-hand S symbol is SEPTA, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority. Second from the left is the CTA, the Chicago Transportation Authority. The large M is, of course, Metro. The large T is the MBTA in Boston. And furthest to the right, the three stripes is New Jersey Transit. With regard to our comparisons, rail collisions include any contact between two rail transit vehicles or any collision that causes substantial damage to Class 1 or Class 2 vehicles. There were 10 reportable rail collisions in both calendar year 2018 and calendar year 19. It's a year-over-year flat performance. The majority of these incidents involved maintenance equipment in yards or traveling to and from work zones. When compared to our peers, Metro is roughly in the middle with 1.1 rail collisions per million revenue miles. With regard to derailments, our derailment performance reduced by 4 incidents, from 9 in calendar year 2018 to 5 in calendar year 2019. The improvements were the result of instituting stringent requirements regarding high rail equipment state of good repair. There were no revenue rail derailments in calendar year 2019. When compared to our peers, Metro is the second highest with 0.5 derailments per million revenue miles, the majority of which are involving third-party high rail equipment. The NTD customer injury rate was 1.3 customer injuries per million passenger trips in calendar year 19, compared with 1.4 in calendar year 18, representing a 6% decrease. 91% of the injuries were slips, trips, and falls. Injuries involving being caught in train doors decreased 54%. 6 injuries in calendar year 19, while customers being struck by fare gates were 9 for both years. When compared to our peers, Metro is the lowest with 1.4 injuries per million unlinked trips. Unlinked trips measure a trip as every time a person boards and alights the vehicle. Linked trips capture the entire journey as one trip, even if there's a transfer in the middle. The OSHA recordable rail employee injury rate decreased by 14% from 3.8 injuries per 100 employees in calendar year 18 to 3.3 in calendar year 19. The Rail Transportation Group had the most injuries with 88 in calendar year 19, which is a 4% decrease from years prior. Maintenance and support injuries decreased by 18%. Stress, pushing and pulling, and assault-related injuries are the leading categories. They all decreased for rail transportation, while maintenance and support groups had fewer slip, trip, and fall, and lifting and lowering injuries. When compared to the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics industry benchmark, Metro is 13% lower than other agencies reporting to the BLS. With regard to prior safety initiatives, many of the piloted safety initiatives from the last board rail safety briefing have been implemented. Some initiatives have resulted in significant decreases to incidents. By using a data-driven approach, full implementation was justified. The first initiative focused on escalator injuries, where customers slip and fall while walking on escalators. Automated safety announcement devices that reminded customers to hold on to the handrail were installed at the Gallery Place Chinatown, National Airport, and Capitol South escalators. There was a small decrease in slip, trip, and fall injuries when initially installed, but over time, the decrease is not substantial enough to be considered statistically significant and warrant full implementation throughout the system. The devices will remain active in the areas where they were piloted, and we will continue to acquire and analyze data relative to slips, trips, and falls on those escalators. The next initiative focuses on reducing head strike injuries within our workforce by utilizing a new hard hat. Given that 1/3 of traumatic brain injuries are from falls from the same level, Metro looked for additional protection to prevent these types of injuries, especially as slips, trips, and falls are the leading injury types amongst our workforce. This new hard hat provides for lateral impact protection, including impacts from front, top, side, and rear. The helmet also stays on the head during tumbling and multiple impact scenarios due to a strap system similar to a bike helmet that secures the helmet in place. There were approximately 100 pilot participants that provided positive reviews, and no injuries were reported within that work group. It is now Metro policy that all track walkers wear the new helmet. The final initiative with which I'd like to give an update is with regard to the Insulating Mat Program. This program was aimed to prevent unintentional contact to the third rail while working in close proximity. In addition to having third rail power de-energized, personnel are to drape a large insulated mat over the third rail to prevent and mitigate risk associated with an unexpected re-energization. There have been no third rail shock incidents since these protective measures have been instituted. With regard to customer safety at our stations, we've undertaken many enhancements as we are modernizing our station efforts. Next slide, please. Our stations will feature 8 new 8-inch hexagonal tiles that are slip resistant, which match the original station tile design. These new tiles are being placed throughout the stations, on the platform, and inside the mezzanine. The tiles are produced through a process called wire cutting, which gives each tile texture and provides better traction in wet conditions. Approximately 21% of our station tiles have been replaced. 19 of our 91 stations have been completed. 7 stations are complete, 11 stations are complete with concrete pavers, and Potomac Avenue is under contract. With regard to lighting improvements, new lighting will be installed at each station, greatly increasing the brightness and visibility within the station. The new lights are placed in the same locations and match the type of existing lights to preserve the original station design, but utilize new LED technology, which will both reduce energy consumption and maintenance costs. In addition, all existing stair handrails are being placed with LED illuminated handrails. With regard to lighting, we are nearing completion throughout the system with the LED lighting upgrade. Stainless steel platform shelters, similar to those at the Silver Line stations, equipped with USB charging ports, are also being installed on our exterior stations. Each shelter will have 55-inch digital displays and new windscreens to provide protection from the elements. The digital displays will replace static maps and have the capability to display dynamic content such as service alerts, important messages, and emergency information if needed. The new stainless steel platform shelters have been installed in 8% of our stations, and we are actively monitoring the efficacy and maintainability of those platform shelters. Thus far, all indications show that they are a significant improvement. The screens on platforms, known as passenger information displays that scroll through next arriving trains, service alerts, and other announcements, are being upgraded to digital screens. There will also be twice as many screens on each platform, making them more visible from multiple areas on the platform. Additionally, the information on the screens will be split so that one could always view the train arrival times, while service alerts and other important messages will scroll along the bottom. Most of these installations have been completed in the stations that have been overhauled. Approximately 14% of parapet mount screens, 6 stations have been complete, 7 are in progress. With regard to our station improvements, finally, we are upgrading our surveillance systems, as well as including clearer speakers for important announcements and safety call buttons with direct contact to station managers and the Operations Control Center. Metro has identified 20 additional stations in need of platform reconstruction, with the first 6 stations completed in summer of 2019. In summer of 2020, We will repair and reconstruct platforms at multiple stations. With regard to the majority of our slip, trip, and fall injuries within our customer base, most of those occur on or near escalators. Metro will be piloting floor mats that remind customers to hold the handrail, among other safety messaging. The mats will be custom wet area mats, which may reduce slip hazards in inclement weather. DuPont Circle and Potomac Avenue have the highest slip incident counts and will be the first locations piloted for this effort. With regard to employee safety, based upon the successes we've seen with the bus operator de-escalation training, Metro Transit Police Department will be providing similar training to our station managers. During the training, cues are discussed that indicate whether or not an assault is imminent, including muscle rigidity and conspicuous ignoring. Station managers are also taught to control the reactionary gap in relative positioning so that they maintain control of the arc of movement. Our station managers are being actively taught to use the station surveillance systems to maximize their personal safety. We will continue to monitor the efficacy and outcomes of these pilot implementations, and should they prove successful, we will propose that they be implemented throughout the system or in areas where we believe there'll be a significant reduction in customer and employee injuries. Finally, this represents an effort with regard to implementing our safety management system. This is through controlling hazard identification and data-driven risk management strategies to support targeted risk reduction efforts throughout our system. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. You know, I think this is a very good report, and if I could just look again at slide 3, which is entitled Rail Performance and Benchmarking, which shows that Metro has not only improved safety-wise from year to year, comparing the calendar 19 data with the preceding year data, but in terms of our comparative group of transit properties nationwide, we also appear to place very well on a comparative mode. So I think that you should be commended for your efforts, and the Chief Operating Officer, Joe Lederer, should be commended as well for taking control of this system and producing these results. And I'd like to offer a shout out to the men and women who work on the Metro Rail system as operators who work in the yards, maintaining the cars, who work on the tracks, keeping the tracks shipshape, as well as those in the rail operations control center. I think they all deserve some sign of appreciation for their efforts in producing these results over the past year. I know that 4 or 5 years ago, when I was first on the Metro board, results were much different, and this is a big improvement. And as I said, all is responsible for the Metro Rail performance, from the general manager through the chief operating officer on down to the men and women who operate the system, should be commended for these results. So thank you. Let me just start the questioning with a couple technical questions dealing with this slide 3, and then slide 5. You indicated the difference between linked and unlinked trips as shown on the right-hand side comparison of customer injury rates. But why can't we have a comparison of linked trips, both in terms of the Metro Rail performance from year to year, as well as in comparison with the other 4 transit properties? Why is it not possible to make that comparison on linked trips as well?
The data that's encapsulated within the National Transit Database measures differently. The difference is largely in the denominator. The customer injury rate is measured per million linked trips, and the customer injury rate within NTD is measured in unlinked trips. So we believe that our linked trips provide us more information. We have access to that data internally. Externally facing, we are constrained by the granularity and resolution of the information that's contained within the database.
Thank you. I think that's a helpful clarification. Just one more question on slide 5, which is the station movements. Do you have a list of which stations have these already in place through last year's platform work? The improved, more efficient LED lighting, and which have the platform shelters with the charging ports. Is that information that you have at your fingertips today?
The LED lighting has been complete at nearly all of our stations. With regard to the platform reconstruction efforts, that included the slip-resistant tile installation, the stainless steel platform shelters, that includes the 6 stations that were completed in summer of 2019. That's Braddock Road, King Street, Eisenhower Avenue, Huntington, Van Dorn, and Franconia Springfield.
Thank you. And finally, on the last bullet, new surveillance, could you just describe that in a little more detail? Is this just more camera locations and cameras of better quality that you're referring to here?
We did upgrade the camera system into the latest technology that includes additional camera installations so that we have further coverage availability from multiple angles, as well as pan tilt zoom capabilities. We've noticed with regard to the upgrade in the camera technology that in areas where there may be low lighting conditions, the cameras have provided improved resolution in the evening. We also are working to ensure that we're identifying any opportunities to enhance our ability to conduct real-time analytics with regard to the surveillance. That is something that we are actively working on with our partners in MTPD, as well as with vendors and service providers in the market.
And those improved cameras, they're now available at the same Virginia stations that you mentioned that were the subject of last year's summer platform reconstruction work?
Yes, sir. Additionally, most of the upgrades to stations, approximately 80%, have been completed outside of the Virginia stations. This was a project that's been worked on over the course of the past year or so.
Thank you. That's the questions that I have. Let me open it up round robin to the other board members. Since this is an information item, there'll be no vote at the conclusion of this presentation this morning. So, Mr. Horner, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Ms. Gideby?
Sorry, Teresa. Excuse me.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Letourneau?
Yeah, just one. So on the comparator slide, I noticed that MTA in New York is not one of the jurisdictions that we or one of the agencies we benchmark against. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. When we were considering our options relative to benchmarks, we wanted to look at agencies that had similar ridership, similar numbers of stations, similar types of equipment fleets, and the comparison between Metro and New York wouldn't really provide the same level of accuracy as what one would see with sister agencies.
Do you have any sense for where they would rank on some of these things, though? And I say that only because it's kind of been my impression, both in some of the personnel decisions that we've made and kind of other things that we've done, that we were trying at one point to sort of benchmark some of their things here. So I am kind of curious, even if it's not a direct comparison. I understand they're a lot larger, of, where they rank on some of these things.
Thank you. Mr. Letourneau?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gideby? Sorry, Teresa.
Yeah, So if that's something that's available, I'd be interested in seeing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could certainly circle back and provide you the comparison with the kind of stipulation that there's nothing like New York.
Yeah, right.
So in some aspects, New York faces system challenges and constraints that are not seen anywhere else in the nation. In other aspects, that could perhaps skew the perception and make New York appear to not be performing at a certain level because those constraints wouldn't be taken into consideration. In others, New York would appear superior. So that's why we've excised them, but I'll get you that data.
Okay, thanks.
If I could just jump in, this is Joe Leader. To give you my impression, the difference between New York since I was there, when it comes to maintenance equipment, we use a lot of maintenance equipments that have actual trucks, which are more stable when they travel along the right of way. So when Teresa mentioned about the derailments and the fact it was mostly high rail vehicles, that is what smaller properties use like Metro. So that's why most likely derailments when it comes to maintenance equipment be much lower in the case of New York City Transit versus all the smaller properties, because we use high rail equipment, which has a very, it's very susceptible to wheel climb because there is no suspension when it comes to as it's moving down the right of way. So there is definitely a difference. And I think the way Teresa described it, yeah, New York probably would not be a good example to compare all properties.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and you were one of the people I was thinking
of. Thank you for that insight, Mr. Leonard. Secretary Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions for me.
Mr. Mcmillan.
No questions, thanks.
Mr. Meridian.
No questions, thank you.
Chair Smedberg.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Impastato, for that presentation today. I hope we'll someday soon, after the virus and the social distancing efforts end, be able to go back to a system where our riders can enjoy the improvements and safety initiatives on Metro Rail that you've described this morning, with, I guess, our ridership standing currently at about 8% of the normal weekday Metro Rail ridership. Most of our riders will be waiting a while until they can get back on the system again, but we look forward to having them on the system and welcoming them back, to which is, as you've described this morning, a very safe and reliable system. So thank you again, and thank you all that men and women that work on the Metro Rail. With no further business coming before the committee, unless there are some final comments from you, Ms. Impastato, or from any of the other staff, any final comments? All right. We then stand adjourned. The next item of business is the special Board of Directors meeting, which will begin shortly. So I would ask the Secretary, Ms. Ellison, if you could give board members and the public participating in this online some guidance as to when the special Board of Directors meeting will begin.
We can begin as soon as Chair Smedberg is ready. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, okay, Ms. Ellison. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Thank you, Ms. Ellison. I think we'll start right away because we do have a proposed exec session after this and other requirements for the general manager after that. So let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate everyone's flexibility in enabling today's meetings to continue in spite of requirements to stay at home and avoid large gatherings. I will now ask Ms. Ellison to call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Present.
Director Horner?
Present.
Director Letourneau?
Present.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Present.
Director Slater?
Present.
Director Mcmillan?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum. I will note for the record that as the same that was in Finance and our Capital Committee this morning, Mr. Horner is recusing himself from the budget item on today's agenda, and Mr. Rouse will be participating in his place. Thank you.
Ms. Ellison, could we also just do a quick roll of the staff that may be on the line for people who may have joined after one or two of the committee meetings?
Absolutely.
Yep.
General Manager Wiedefeld?
Present.
General Counsel Patty Lee?
Here.
Chief Safety Officer Teresa Impastato?
Present.
Chief Financial Officer Dennis Anasike?
Here.
Chief of Capital Planning Tom Webster?
Here.
Chief of External Relations Barbara Richardson? Senior Vice President of Customer Service, Communications and Marketing Lynn Bowersox?
Present.
Chief Operating Officer Joe Leader?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we have an agenda before us for approval. I'd like to move approval of today's agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. I will now turn the floor over to Mr. Mcmillan, Chair of the Finance and Capital Committee, for his committee's report. Mr. Mcmillan.
Thank you. Staff sought approval of the Public Outreach and Input Report, the Title VI Equity Analysis, and the FY 2021 Operating Budget and FY 2021 through 26 Capital Improvement Program. The FY 2021 budget totals $3.9 billion, including $2.1 billion of operating expenses and $1.8 billion of capital investment spending in FY 2021. The six-year capital plan of $9.7 billion builds on demonstrated progress in rehabilitating, replacing, and modernizing our system to meet the needs of customers. The base operating budget is balanced within the 3% subsidy growth cap. The legislative exclusions include funding for Silver Line Phase 2, with revenue service tentatively scheduled to begin April 1st, 2021. During Metro's outreach program on the budget proposal, more than 17,000 responses were received from the public, elected officials, and other stakeholders. Fare and service proposals were adjusted to incorporate feedback received during public outreach, as well as recommendations from Finance and Capital Committee members, and they comply with the equity requirements of Title VI. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Mcmillan. We now have a motion on the floor for approval. Is there a second?
Second. This is Jeff Meridian.
Seconded by Mr. Meridian. Thank you. Now the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Like we've done in the prior two meetings to this, I will just go around the table, so to speak, and ask people if they have any questions or comments that they would like to make. And first, I'll turn to you, Ms. Gibity.
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman.
No further comments. I stand by the comments that I made during the Finance and Budget Committee meeting this morning.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse, filling in for Director David Horner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No further comments or questions from me at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Letourneau.
Right, Mr. Goldman, I think my comments from the Finance Committee meeting still apply. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Meridian.
Thank you. No comments.
And Mr. Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further comment.
All right. I'd like to ask Ms. Ellison to conduct a roll call vote now. Ms. Ellison.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Approve, aye.
Alternate Director Rouse,
Aye.
Director Letourneau,
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian,
Aye.
Director Slater,
Aye.
Director Mcmillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. And again, I'd like to thank our riders and our stakeholders, particularly our funding partners, whose comments helped shaped our, and riders whose comments helped shaped our final budget proposal, and my colleagues and staff who have been working under can easily be expressed as some challenging circumstances to come to an agreement on this budget. I'd also like to thank Mr. Mcmillan and the Finance Committee for their work, and the General Manager, Mr. Aniseke, and others at Wmata staff. I know, again, dealing with multiple issues in addition to the budget at a very challenging time. Next on the agenda, we have a consent item. And also, we have one item for approval today, excess property sales. Staff requests board approval to sell properties at 9400 Lopsport Road in Largo, Maryland, and at 5708 Vine Street in Alexandria, Virginia, for amounts in excess of $1 million each. Because of the dollar amount of the sales price, these transactions require board approval. I'd like to move approval. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Rouse. I think I heard your voice first. Madam Board Secretary, we have a motion and a second. Please take the roll.
Actually, Mr. Horner is participating in this.
Oh, Mr. Horner is
action.
participating in this? Okay.
Yes, he was only recused from one item, yes. So you'll need a different second. Thank you.
Yeah, then maybe that was Mr. Horner I heard.
It was.
It was, okay.
I'm happy for my
seconded by Mr. Horner.
I'll record. Thank you so much, and I'll do the vote now. Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Director Horner?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
And Director Mcmillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. With no further business to come before the board, we now stand adjourned. We will be going in. I'll be making a motion soon to go into exec session. But before I do, I want to thank everyone for their willingness and patience. I know this is hard. We're getting used to all this video conferencing and everything, so appreciate that. After the motion, though, I would like to give people just a few minutes for a bio break before we reconvene, and I'll remind you that a phone number and an email was sent to you on how to join the board executive session that will convene in just a few minutes. So now, in accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, Wmata's contracts and sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions or the federal government, and F, safety and security matters when premature release would compromise public safety. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Again, thank you very much. We'll just take a few minutes here. If we could reconvene in 5 minutes, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.